year, they started to clean it. And they found out, especially in this globe, when they really cleaned it, the one in the previous photo is basically black. They found out this profile of Korea that comes from the Sanson map. So this is China and Korea, this is the New World, okay, 2 images. Now, this profile of Korea is only in Neroni. No other cartographer in Europe has created a profile of Korea of this kind. And basically, when you look at a map, especially world maps, there are features that you identify, kind of that tell you what is the source, what is the time. Because of the connection between Ruggeri and Neroni, preserved through Sanson, we know that's the only source for this unique feature. Once you know this, then basically when you clean, because when you clean a globe like this, some parts are just clean, others need to be integrated. So basically, once you know it's from Sanson, the part that needs to be integrated, you know it's from Neroni, then you integrate it based on what we know from Neroni. Restoration is not just a trivial matter of taking the dirt away. Sometimes it's really about which part needs to be filled with what in a very conservative way. So China is based on Neroni. The Korea is based on this. And California, that had this profile in Dante, has this on the globe, this embouage. It's a match. It's a match. And if you see these two side by side, it's a match. For me, actually, it was very exciting because I visited this map scholar this summer, Marica Milanese. And she told me, I want to show you something. I want to show you something, the globe. Okay, so, thanks to the fact that I work with you on China, I could identify the globe as being from Neroni because of Korea. And I told her, well, you know, there is a whole America there. And she couldn't almost believe it. And then she used it to check if she had done her America right. And it was right, everything was matching. But on the other hand, from the point of view of studying the information here, the information on the map is from 1604. The one from the globe is a bit later, but there is less readable information on the globe. So basically, we still have to stick with the map from the point of view of what we want to understand about California. Now,
Cabrilho doesn't show up in your book, but it's less names.
I actually, sometimes, just like this cartographer, just like this Neroni, had never been to China, but would reproduce what Ruggeri gave him. So sometimes I also kind of act like a middleman, okay? Here, I got the images of California from the BNF, just like you did. I got the images of the globe from this scholar, from Marica Milanese. And actually, I asked her, she was very excited that we were going to this conference, but I asked her, can you send me better images? But she didn't send me better images. I get that we don't have better images, yeah. The globe is now available in Florence, so anyone, I believe, can go to Florence and take a better image. But I don't think there will be, even though the globe is 2 meters in diameter, it's gigantic. But it's less detailed than these maps. There's nothing you can do about that. I don't think, but you never know. I'm not able to tell you. I wouldn't be too optimistic, but I'm not sure. As simply a last thing is which sources. This is something that should be done, well, in the future, okay? Which sources was Neroni using? He was using around 9 months. We know specifically for this map of America that I showed you before, 9 months, okay? What would he do? He would use a lot Ortelius Atlas. The Medici family had every single edition, and they printed like 20 over 2-3 decades of Ortelius Atlas, the first atlas of the world. So each new edition would have updates. So he would use a lot of atlases. He would also use sea charts, okay, by Tetton in this case. So it's a British source based on Spanish sources. And why is this relevant? Well, because it's quite similar, but also because at the National Library in Florence. That means it comes from the Medici collection. So these are, and Teton has two maps. This is a printed version, printed by Claes in a Dutch engraver, and this is the original. And there is Cabrillo, but with double L in that one. That's a Spanish source. Conclusion, well, to the wider question, I basically give you an exemplification through the case of Neroni, of how this information circulated and how, again, the things in the cartography of China and America very differently shaped. Because, I mean, we date the maps of America according to the year we know the information about any new discovery reached Madrid, Florence. The maps of China, well, we just know which printed edition the Jesuits were using of the Chinese printed atlases, and not about new discoveries. But what we know is that looking more closely into the network of this cartographer, there is much more than we can find. And just in the process, basically, of doing this research, I found out 2 more maps. The sources, probably the best way to analyze the sources is to do further research in Florence. But on the other hand, this whole process of investigating old maps and time really lost maps kind of creates kind of energy to look at historical issues with new eyes. Thank you.
So if you have questions, we still have.
Yeah, maybe we're out of time.
Can I So I have two questions. One is a complicated question. The question was, and it may actually be completely irrelevant, but do we know what languages Neroni was speaking?
Yeah.
The microphone.
The microphone.
Okay. I was asking, and I know that it may be irrelevant, but I was asking if you know what languages Neroni spoke, if that ever got in the way, because I understand that he was seeing other sources and copying, but I wonder at what point would the fact that he would know one spelling of Spanish or Portuguese, if that could affect it or not. And the other thing is that this kind of research actually may, I really do archival research too, and I think it's awesome. And so this actually allows, may allow you to identify whether there was a Portuguese source or something like that that's contributed to the copy, right? To the way that he spelled those names, and maybe will lead to what could have been the Portuguese source that was at the root of that. But anyway, that's just that.
So the first question was the language of the map, or?
Neroni himself. If you know himself.
You mean with Neroni?
Yeah, if we have knowledge of what languages some of these cartographers spoke.
Well, I mean, Neroni was basically Florentine, so what is closer to standard Italian now. And he basically spent his whole life in Italy, so between Rome and Florence, he would mainly have used normal literary Italian, Florentine, and the kind of language they were using in Rome, which was relatively close to Florentine. Not necessarily, because unlike other scholars he worked for, he was a cosmographer, so he was actually employed with relatively high status by the Duke, but he was still basically an artisan. I mean, he was more into stealing books than writing books. So that was well, clearly he was able to work with different sources, maybe to a certain extent to understand Latin sources. But it's very interesting how the cartographers basically got this enormous amount of information, but reprocess it. Well, basically by doing a big combination. I mean, sometimes I think also a certain amount of guessing. It was quite rigorous the way they tried to incorporate any new data of discovery. Okay? We can date these maps really sometimes by the year, by the newest information about discovery that came to Florence. Florence was a big knowledge center. But most of these maps have a lot of different sources. There is never one source. It could be from 10 to 20 different sources. Now, again, understanding a map like this means which part of the map comes from which source. That's really the point. Now, is it Teton to which degree? And then if it is Teton, why does he use a different spelling? Does it reflect any preference of the court, any relationship he had with Portuguese cartographers? That's really the question that needs to be answered by, while looking at this. We don't have the sources he was using. So in a sense, we have very clear detail on the amount of money that was spent to pay him, the amount of time he spent in making this map. We simply have to guess that beside the printed sources, what he was using must have been in the collection available to the Medici. And most of these things are still scattered in different collections in Florence. But this really awaits, discovery. But the bottom line would say, well, for Cabrillo, probably one source, or at least a reason for him to prefer one source over the other, or one spelling over the other. For the whole map of America, many sources. Thank you. Oh, maybe.
Yes. I'd just like to add that to give context, Neroni was working with Galileo himself at the same time when he was also teaching astronomy as a cosmographer. Just to give you an idea, it's amazing hearing Galileo and Neroni all together in the same place.
Thank you, Marco. I can hardly wait to get your book, actually. I have a bit of a technical question. There was a slide 2 or 3 from the end where you had Alta and Baja California. And oh, it's not there. Okay. So, well, okay, I can't really ask the question. I'll talk to you later. I took a photo of it. There are lines emanating in a bit of a sun ray type of organization around Nova Albion, and they're irregular and they don't seem to match with the grid lines. And so it's a technical question about why those might be, but yeah, I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, maybe that's also better, because then I would have the time.
Sure.
To think of.
He asks she's about to change the slides. But
Oh, it's okay.
Would it be possible for people to get copies of your slides?
I think what copies of the slides.
How would they, what would they do to request them from you? I mean, how does it reach you? How do we get the request to you?
Yeah, I think I can make them available to.
Oh, great, that'd be wonderful. I think there's so much information there, really be wonderful to have it.
This one or further up? No, this is the print.
for the streaming.
Ah, yes.
It's like 2 or 3 from the end.
Here.
Right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So those Nova Albion,
Mm-hmm.
where Drake in 1579 named the land that. Why are those rays emanating from there, and they don't seem to be?
So let's go to this, because it comes from here, okay? So Nova Albion here.
Right.
I don't know.
Okay. It seems to be highlighting and focus on Nova Albion that I don't see on other places. Well, there's a little bit here.
But you mean just the center of the
Yes.
of the lines?
Why?
Those are run lines.
Yeah, they are run lines. So yeah,
Sailing directions.
yeah.
So it's arbitrary where they are. I mean, they're just
Maybe they're putting them where they think the ship
Well, supposedly that should be a point where it was measured in that on the coast. But yeah, I wouldn't know. Oh, here, Cibola and Nova Albion. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know.
There's Colorado and there's Gila. The Gila doesn't seem to go in the right place. There's a third river.
Yeah, for this again, my role of a middleman is to give it to you. And in this case, if it was China, I could tell you. Yeah, but anyway, I would think that the run lines in Nova Albion should point to some kind of at least measure taking in that position. The one in Japan would also be like that. Yeah.
There was a representation, I believe, that was pointed to where it said Bay de Cabrillo, spelled the Portuguese way. And does that also repeat on this map to the right?
This one, no, this one is a Spanish spell.
The and I see, so it's on both ways.
It is, we put on our, we put it here, yeah. It's not particularly clear, but yes, it is. Here it is. Not very readable, but quite clear once you look at the image that it's a double L.
It's a different set of toponyms, so maybe the sources are different.
Evidently, these are Spanish sources. We also know this was a source for Neroni, but evidently he decided to make a change based on whatever further information he had.
Okay, any more questions? We still have a couple minutes in case.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to know how I can look at the California maps again. Are they in your book?
No. This is a very recent development for me. I mean, to go from Neroni as a cartographer of China to Neroni as a cartographer of California. So for me, basically, I just brought you to who is Neroni and why he made a map of America. And the only thing that I can point to you with some confidence is that I checked the spelling of the Cabrillo part. Okay, so for that.
Map somehow later?
Sorry?
Can we look at this map again?
Yeah, I can. Well, basically, it is actually. So this one, you mean? Yes. This map is in the. I can give you the image that I got. That it roughly will give you when you zoom in something like this, slightly better, but not much better, because I try to make it as clear as possible. Now, the only effective way that you could get a better image would be someone writes to the National Library in Florence. I mean, Italy has two national libraries. One is in Rome, as you would expect. One is in Florence, because Florence was a capital for a while and is the only center that actually has a national library. I've been working in a map collection for a while, so I can tell you how do you get a better image. Well, you basically write to a library and you give them what they ask you for the digitization, a couple of $100.
I wrote, and I have a copy of this map, which is in Florence, so I can provide it to you.
So it is in a better resolution than
It's a
this
little bit,
one.
but not much. So
Sadly, sometimes you give them the money and it's still,
That's the
well,
best.
300 DPI. You should get 600 DPI to get it. If you happen to write a request, ask for 600 DPI.
I think it's just because the zoom on the projector, but if you look at it, it's, to the left, it says from here on, all that line, it says the coast is not known. It's written, I'm not sure if it is in English or Castilian, but so again, it's who were the sources of Gabriel Tatten and the sources of Neroni. Oh no, left to the up, so you see that vertical line, kind of at an angle. That part, it has a sentence on it when you look at the details. It says, from up here, we don't know the coast.
Well, with this,
was great, right?
yeah, this just reflects the knowledge of the time that there might be actually a land connection between America and Asia or not. It's in the unexplored north.
Oh, this is 1600, this is 1603.
This one is 1590, should be 1590. This one, because this is the, well, I mean, let's check, okay? But I believe it should be around 1590. Basically, Wagner 37 has the description for that.
Another one from 1600.
There are 3 maps by Tatten. So this is the manuscript, and then there are 2 prints. Which one? What do you mean?
So that would be just south of San Diego, slightly. South of San Diego. Those latitudes are not right.
I guess for that we need a better image than that. Yeah.
It could be better to see it on California.
You mean here? But then here you don't have the.
So
I don't know.
it would be around there. So San Diego would be about, that's 32-ish, right? If this is correct, but the scale may not be linear. But you have the Coronado Islands, so you know, see Bahia de São Miguel over there. So that's what Cabrillo calls San Diego. So that's San Diego. We are at 32 degrees north, right? So the 30 would be slightly below. Again, trusting that there's a proper scale in this map, which is not necessarily.
Was there base for San Diego. I guess they actually nearly extended it.
Well, the feature of many of these maps, I mean, having looked at circulation and printing from manuscript, is that there are 3 maps by Teton and they don't really match, okay? So the manuscript and the 2 prints represent different takes he had on his material. But this is a larger manuscript, so it has more information, basically. The prints tend to be more modified, but it's not that the print is necessarily just a derived version of the manuscript. In the case of the 2 Sanson and Bouache, the two Neroni map that we saw, yes, when you get a manuscript, you get something that is definitely much better. Here you get 2 different versions. This is slightly later, so it might have some different information.
Okay, so I think then this is one of the presentation. I'll just say thank you to Professor Martin.
Thank you.
So I got some suggestions when people are a bit tired and saying, instead of continuing with the program, how about having a coffee break right now? And then we'll reverse the order of the coffee break. If that's okay with you, Professor Lourdes, you're coming next. Can I have a break before? Okay, thank you so much. So let's have a break of about 10 minutes. We'll continue.
Thank you. Oh, well, sorry about that. Well, they find this, and sometimes we see this kind of information that there were many, well, this kind, about 600 bags or something, but the calculations they say that the crowns, which was British coin, was equivalent, well, doing the equivalencies nowadays would be about the value of these 600 bags anil or 400 bags cocoa were about 2,880,000 British pounds nowadays. So it was a lot. Anyway, as they found another ship loaded with cocoa and indigo, they burned this house, this commerce, like the almacén, the storehouse. Thank you. Well then, well they go. He keeps going around the coast of New Spain and take this mestizo Michael Trujillo. They kill his horse and leave him there in the forest. And he comes to Puerto de Navidad, the port that we heard about yesterday as well. He comes with 30 men, and they take another messenger, a mulatto, that comes with letters of advice concerning them. And then they take the letters, set fire on the houses of Puerto de Navidad, which was an important port by then. And he burns 200 tons, 2 ships of 200 tons each. Afterwards, he goes to Santiago Salagua, which is Manzanillo nowadays, to Malacca, and he keeps going to these ports as well. And afterwards, in Chacala, is very interesting here. I would like to read a bit of this, their entrance to Chacala, because it's here where they find this Portuguese. Just, I forgot to pass my pages a little, just a second. Well, it says, it is by then, before that, when they take this pilot, this French pilot, Michael Sancius, they know about the galleon of Manila, who will arrive in November, at the end of November or December. Then they start waiting for the galleon. It was July. And then they passed from July to November, just coming and going in the Pacific. Like, as I told you, Santiago Salagua, Malacca, Puerto de Navidad, robbing and, well, pearling. They learn how to pearl and whatever. But once in Chacala, it was already September, the 8th of September, he says, the 9th in the morning, our general sent up Captain Havers with 40 men of us before day. And Michael Sancius being our guide, we went onto a place about 2 leagues up into the country in a most villainous desert path through the woods and wilderness. And in the end, we came to a place where we took 3 householders with her wives and children and some Indians, 1 carpenter, which was a Spaniard, and a Portugal, and we bound them all and made them to come to the sea to the seaside with us. Our general made their wives to fetch us plantains, lemons, and oranges, pineapples, and other fruits, whereof they had abundance. And so let their husbands depart, except Zambrano, the Spanish carpenter, and Diego de Portugal. On the 10th day, we departed. Well, that's it. But it's interesting because we have this chronicle, which is English, and then we have a beautiful map, which is one of the first maps of the Pacific Ocean, which I didn't bring, I'm sorry, but it's a little bit like a recuadro in one of, the last maps, which is made in New Spain, and well, it's a Spanish source anyway, and both sources talk about Di Zambrano, the Spanish carpenter, and the map says Diego de Portugal they used to call. Then, well, it's here. And, well, they keep going. They take these two men with them because they needed the carpenter as well. And this map is like a recreation of the places they passed in both sources, in the Spanish and the English source. So, well, it's this is another map of the same. It's where they take Sancius and they go all the way north up to Cape San Lucas, where they take the galleon in late November. And well, the battle comes here, and it's very interesting to read as well about the battle. I won't like read it now, but it's here where they at the end take all the passengers of the Santa Ana and take them to Aguada Segura, they call a place which is near Cabo San Lucas, and they put on shore all the people who came in the galleon, which came overloaded, and they couldn't make a thing to save themselves. And we afterwards they leave them there with some. It's funny because he says, and the captain left them with a river where they could fish, with woods, with all nature to serve themselves, and some victuals, and a bit of wine. So well, and they stayed there and they burned the ship, the rest of it. Well, they spent weeks choosing what they wanted to take. Of course, they sunk all the cocoa that they had got in Huatulco, and they took what they wanted. As you know, remember, it was 120 tons there. Their admiral, and the galleon was 400 tons. So they had to spoil the most of the merchandise, and they just burnt it and sunk the ship. And they went back to, well, they went to crossing the Pacific with the help of Michael Sancius. But he says that they took a Spanish pilot who came in the galleon called Tomás Arzola, and a Portuguese called Nicolás Rodrigo. So this is another one, and he was just coming from the east of Asia. Well, now, well, look, this is the map I was telling you about. It's a beautiful map. It is like a porcelain, where he talks from, precisely from Acajutla, where they took Sancius, to Baja California, and every little entrance is a natural port. This is a reconstruction, and this is like that. So apparently, it was made by a pilot that came by sea, and he saw like that the territory, the coastal line, and these are the actual ports they passed. And well, sorry for the not clear image, but this is the one that, this little bay, it's about here, I think, which says, Chacala, aquí prendieron a Jacome Zambrano y un portugués. Chacala, here they took Jacome Zambrano and the Portuguese. And well, this is marvelous, the Spanish source, and we compare it with the English source, and we find this beautiful map that was about Cavendish before the Archivo de Indias, where it's when it is this one. And there is a copy in Mexico, but this is the original, I think. It's, before, they didn't say it was Cavendish, and now they do. Well, why did Cavendish wanted these hostages? I'm finishing. Well, I think only because they knew the language, they may have known the places where, where he was going, and they could be changed for food, because they did this sometimes for food or water, and as a supplementary labor force. I won't go to the end of the story of Nicolás Rodrigo, because it's one of these things that we must have more information and think better about it, because, well, we don't know what happened to Diego the Portuguese. I think, well, it says, what we know is that he took him with him to the southeast of Asia, and we don't know if he died or if he stayed in Portugal or in England, but I suppose that what he wanted to do is to go back to his family in New Spain, but we don't know what happened to him. And about Nicolás Rodrigo, the chronicle says afterwards something that could be like interesting, and that we have to keep researching about, because the Spanish sources are not so clear about it. The English source says that he left with Arzola, but the Spanish source says that, seemed to say that Arzola was not going with them, the pilot, but it was someone else who went, and that afterwards Cavendish hanged. Well, the English source says that Nicolás Rodrigo told Cavendish about how to say, like, not a mutiny, but like he was going to treason him, like Nicolás Rodrigo was going to send. He had a letter that wanted to give someone in Manila, so they could take Cavendish and that rescue them. So apparently, well, Nicolás Rodrigo in the English source seems to have traicionado to the Spanish. Yeah, but we have to do some more research, and as well, we have to, like yesterday we were saying, history is complicated because we have to have, we don't see the whole picture. We don't know how is the circumstances. And having seen how Cavendish was treating the people, the way to save oneself is just to do what you have on hand. So, well, we have to check that. And as I just finished saying that, yesterday I was remembering this French historian Marc Bloch, the father of the French historiography, that used to say that when he was writing his last book, the one that he couldn't finish because he was killed by the Nazi regime, because he was of Jew descent, and as well because he was in the resistance. But he started his book, his postmortem book called Apology for History, saying that his son asked him that, what is the point for history? And then he started thinking about it, and he writes this book that couldn't finish. But one of the things he says there says history is not for judging people who are already dead, who are not here anymore. It's for understanding, for trying to understand ourselves and trying not to do the same things or whatever, or to understand ourselves, or to understand our identity, and well, to see others in a different way, perhaps. Well, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lourdes Ita, for such a great presentation. And I was noticing the añil and the cacao. This was at Huatulco, right? But I think this means that there must have been trade between Huatulco and Guayaquil for the cacao, and between Guatemala for the añil. So, and you know, I had always heard that the big money was in silver, and there was, you know, maybe 5% of the Manila galleon had añil and cacao. But when they get 2 million, it makes me think maybe it was a little more important. And I guess, well, I guess that's all. Thank you so much. From Guatemala.
Yes, there was
So just that we have some people attending online.
Thank you. Yes, it was not, these products were coming from Acajutla as well, which is Guatemala, and certainly from Guayaquil, the cacao should have come. Yes, Huatulco was not only, was forbidden for the intercolonial trade, but not for the coastal trade that kept going all the time until after Drake's visit, because after Cavendish visit, because Drake and Cavendish went to Huatulco, and Cavendish burnt it to the ground. And afterwards, the Viceroy decided in 1604, I think, that they should take the population inland to Santa Maria de Huatulco, because that was before in Santa Cruz, the Huatulco, which is nowadays a resort again. But then they moved it inland, and that's something very important, because being Mexico, a country with that coastal line in the Pacific and in the Atlantic, it only had for 250 years one port in the Atlantic open to the intercolonial trade with the metropole, and one port in the Pacific. Then what happened, and passing by Mexico City, this principal trail, then the city, which already, when it was Tenochtitlan, it was already a huge central city, it became even more centralized, even bigger, and Mexico grew inwards instead of having a natural development, regional development in the coasts as well. Well, anyway, it was because of that, because of these attacks in the Pacific, because it was so like it was impossible to make a fortress in every natural port. So what they decided to do was to move the population inlands. Well, sorry, you asked me something different, but it's a consequence of that.
So cacao was also explored in that region, right? Sonsonate, Acajutla, there was lots of cacao, including Cabrillo. He had some farms in that region. So cacao was not just from Guayaquil. Yeah. A lot, actually. Sonsonate.
Uruapan and Oaxaca. It's marvelous to see how not only the regional products were like being like spread all around the coast, for instance, but as well the Asian products, because if you see the influence of the Manila galleon in the Pacific, in Tehuantepec, for instance, or in Michoacán, no? The lacas, the flowers of the huipiles in Tehuantepec or in Guatemala are from Korea and from China. These pioneers. It's great. Anyway.
Anyone has another question? Call those flowers naturalized. They are not native, but they got naturalized. My wife is from botanics. That's how they're called. Yeah.
Good morning. I'm sorry. I didn't assist to all your presentation. I'm sorry for such. It's working.
It should be okay. Yeah. It's just for the
Okay.
stream.
So you listen me? You are listening me? Okay. Just to add about this movement that is, I told yesterday that the creation of the Cape Route in the Atlantic Ocean was a way of the Silk Roads that for thousands of years made the connections between Europe and Asia to have a new circuit from which Europe was able to receive much more cargoes. And in a certain way, this movement of the Pacific Ocean is also the same interaction with something new that was the American goods. And there is another one that it was very important at that time. It was tobacco. I remember to see in the Archivo de Indias in Seville documentation where some missionaries were, by the beginning of the 17th century, blaming that most of the cargo was tobacco. It was vicious. That's something that it should not go. And because it was so much tobacco that even in the open field of the ship, they have boxes with tobacco. So, and it was a great exportation to China and to Japan. And for example, in the Jesuits in Japan, they had a large debate if they should smoke or not. And there was a rivalry between the Europeans and the Japanese. One of the things that the European Jesuits say in Japan not to ordain the Japanese priests is because they smoke. So, but that's what's coming from America. So all this was in a movie. It was very interesting. I think that is.
Right, maybe one more question, or well, my question would be: Nicolás Rodrigo was a pilot himself, and Diego Portuguese, you know, was a carpenter. Any information on that?
Well, I have. Thank you. Thank you. No, Nicolás Rodrigo apparently was not a pilot. The pilot was Arzola, Thomas Arzola, who were coming with the galleon. But the thing is, I don't have the document yet. I am just asking for it because it's not, I can't get it in another way, or going to the archive in Seville. And it must have more information about him. But there, in that case, for instance, in the ports that they passed by New Spain, both sources coincide, but not in this case. It's like something to still to research, yes. And Diego is fascinating story because it's only a mention, but we suppose, well, I suppose that he was just a normal inhabitant of New Spain with this carpenter Rodrigo Zambrano. And the strange thing is that they were living there in to the north of Bahía de Banderas, to the north of Puerto Vallarta, in a place where it was, well, by the end of the 16th century, Guanajuato and Querétaro was almost the northern frontier. So it was the tierra de nadie, no? So, yeah, but there are not information. I have to go to the Spanish sources as well to see if there are some more. But it's beautiful to know how, because of him and Zambrano, we know that these two maps is related with the chronicler.
Right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we should thank Professor. Okay, so I think we move to the next presentation, right? We are trying to keep on time here. Yeah, we started 20 minutes later as well. And so, see. Não, é a informação biográfica que é a última que estou a Right, so we have the honor of having with us Professor Ignasio Javier Chuecas Saldias from the University of Finisterre in Santiago de Chile. Professor Saldias is a full professor at the Faculty of Humanities and Communications, a member of the CDOC Research Center, a director of the Interdisciplinary Doctorate Program in Humanities, again in Finisterre University in Santiago de Chile. He has a doctorate from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome and another one from the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile. He was awarded the Excellency Prize in his doctoral thesis in the area of humanities and social sciences by the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile. He's been studying across the world, right? He was a visiting assistant at research in the Yale University in the United States, a magister and bachelor in the University of Westfälisch Wilhelmshaven Universität in Münster in Germany. He has been part of many projects at national and international level, and his lines of research are focused on the social history of the American imperial borders and peripheries during the modern age, 16th to 18th century, with an emphasis on colonial, migratory, and religious phenomena. Currently, he's the responsible researcher for projects as Conversos, Family and the Empire, so the Jews were known as Conversos, right? In the imperial context of the 16th and 17th century. Another project in the same line is Praying to the Gods of Israel, according to the Portuguese tradition in the 16th and 18th centuries. He's the chair of the Sephardic Studies Alberto Benvenisti in the Faculty of Humanities in the University of Lisbon in Portugal. He's also the member of the team that does research of the crossroads in Louvain in Belgium. And finally, a member of the research group of History of Inquisitions and the Study Center of Religious History in the Portuguese Catholic University. So we have an amazing speaker with us. Thank you so much, Professor.
To point out,
it should be the red one, I think.
It's there.
The red one, but I have a green one if you prefer. So this move the
Very well.
slides and the red one.
Very well.
Very well. Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay. So thank you very much, Pablo, for the presentation, Ricardo for the invitation, and everyone here for being here and sharing your knowledge and your commentaries. So my question today is citizenship. And at the end, the main question of citizenship among Portuguese migrants is identity. How do you build identity in the late medieval time and in the early modern times? And how do you build identity as a migrant in another place, in another society, in a place where you are new or you are not so well integrated? In this sense, we face many issues, many challenges, and many problems. So whose problem was citizenship at that time? Was their problem, the immigrants, because mostly they were illegal. But to be an illegal immigrant at that time means a whole other thing than today. This is a total different matter. In fact, to be an illegal immigrant at that time would not make any influence on your life, despite in some minor cases. And then also is there problems, in this case our Portuguese migrants, but now is also our problem, because we have problems to understand their situation. We have this challenge to overpass anachronism. Anachronism, you know, means trying to adjust our own categories to the past. You know? And this is a huge problem because in the early modern times, political culture was very different. How national identity and how power and hierarchies were contrasted, that was very different. And also legal culture was very different. How legal, what means to be, for example, an illegal migrant, or what means, for example, smuggle, in trade, not to follow the rules when you were trading. So in this case, we have to realize how important the changes were in our culture, which were made in the 19th century. The 19th century, the beginning of the contemporary time, was characterized by a huge change in political, legal, also religious culture. No? So what we know and what we are used today to know about that would not apply to the early modern time. So I would like to start with an example, a case of study taken from my country. At that time was not my country, was the Kingdom of Chile, part of the Peruvian viceroyalty, the viceroyalty of Peru. No? In the Spanish America, there were two big viceroyalty, the viceroyalty of New Spain and the viceroyalty of Peru. Chile, the Kingdom of Chile, was a part of the viceroyalty of Peru. And we did have this governor in the 17th century. He was called Francisco de Meneses, a very Portuguese name, no? Very, very Portuguese. He was not a good governor. He was called Barabbas, like the friend of Jesus, because he was very, I don't know, very exalted, a very special person. So he was the governor in Chile in those years. And when in the 18th centuries, the Chilean historians, still in the colonial times, spoke about him, they would say always that he was a Portuguese, no? That Francisco de Meneses, as everyone knows, was of Portuguese nationality, no? This is a Jesuit writing in Italy, no, at the end of the 18th century in Italian. And this is also a Jesuit writing also at that time. And he says, no, Don Francisco de Meneses, a Portuguese nobleman. And in the Chilean history, a very important Chilean historian from the 19th century would also say the same. Barros Arana said Meneses was as known, or como se sabe, as everyone knows, a Portuguese by birth, and tells a little story about him, which is invented. Nothing is true in this story. In fact, Francisco de Meneses has never been to Lisbon. No? Okay. And I found this power to make a will in the archive in Lima. He died in Lima this year. And he tells another story about him. No, he begins his power of to make a will, and he said, "I'm a native of Cádiz in the kingdoms of Spain." My opinion, also natural here is that I have always the original transcription and the translation. Natural in a testament is so common. This is the typical beginning of a will. And natural means the place you were born. I think there's nothing against that. It's the place you were born. So, and he was in fact born in Cádiz. So I went to Cádiz. I went to Cádiz to search for these people, for his family. I knew because of this document the name of his parents here, Don Alonso de Meneses y Doña Catalina Corvalán de Castilla. Very high standard names. I guess this is all a little bit, this is not true. What is this family name of his mother is just invented here. Is created by him. So I went to Cádiz, to the archives in Cádiz, and I did find, in fact, a lot of information of this family. And this is what I found. Here is Francisco, his siblings, his father Alonso, his mother Catalina de Gorbalán. In Cádiz has always the same name, which is not Corvalán de Castilla, but Gorbalán. And the grandfather, the grandmother, and also uncles and aunts. of him. And if you look, take a look into his grandmother has also a very Castilian, I would say Navarran Basque name. This Oñez de Gamboa comes from northern Portugal and for northern Spain from Navarra, no? And this uncle here, he was an attorney at the Real Chancillería of Granada, which means he was not born in Portugal. He must have been born in Cádiz, of course, because to be an attorney or to have some place like that in the Real Chancillería, you must be born in Castile, in this case, or in Andalusia. So, and also there was an aunt, which was a nun, and another aunt was married to a man in the city council of the port of Santa Maria, and that means she was a Castilian or Andalusian, I guess. But the grandfather, I don't know much about him, but I guess I am almost sure he came from Portugal. So this is a mixed Andalusian Portuguese family. And I guess there starts our travels. This amount of Portuguese people living in Castile, living everywhere, and living in the Indies, which acquired a real ambiguous status, because they would remain Portuguese through many generations. So why that? And the problem is, this is my theory, one of my theories, the problem is that Castile and Portugal are too close. Are too close. They were, in this connection between Castile and Portugal, both kingdoms or crowns in the Iberian Peninsula, was so intensive, so on a daily basis. And well, you know, Spain didn't exist as we know now. They were the different crowns and kingdoms. So we have to understand and to take account of this close relationship between Portugal and the crown of Castile and the other Iberian crowns or kingdoms. One example for me very important is how the families, the royal families, will intermarry. No, here I show you, this is the house of Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, the Catholic kings, and as you see, member of the royal house of Portugal, the House of Avis, would intermarry with the house of Castile and Aragon through many generations. No? And that was the case also, I have here Isabella is also in blue, because Isabella was the daughter of a Portuguese princess, and she has a lot of Portuguese ancestors, because also the house of Trastámara was intermarried with the house of Avis and the Portuguese royal family for many generations. This is very important because, for example, there is a phenomena that has struck many researchers, is the use of Spanish in Lisbon. In Lisbon, Spanish was very used. A lot of printing in Spanish. Many Portuguese poets were writing in Spanish, and in a very high standard Spanish. And many say that's because of the infantas from Castile that went into Lisbon with a court, with a whole bunch of people, and they have a little Castilla there, a little Castile also in Lisbon. And another important moment, I guess, is the expulsion of the Jews from Castile and Aragon. Why? We know now that especially also Jews from Aragon went into the Mediterranean, but Aljamas, Jews from Castile, went into Portugal, because they also thought that the expulsion was very, very brief, so they wanted to come back. So they went, they just crossed the border and waited there. Many of these Castilian Jews. And as we know now, they became Cristãos Novos, no? New Christians in Portugal. And also the group of the Cristãos Novos in Portugal became a very huge community of people, very large. No? So an important part in the 16th century, an important part of the Portuguese society was in fact descendant coming from Castile. No? And here I have this example from the Ferrara Bible. Perhaps you know, the Ferrara Bible is a translation from the Hebrew Bible into Spanish, done by Portuguese in Ferrara, in the Italian city of Ferrara. And these two Portuguese, one was named Abraham Usque, Portuguese. His Christian name was Duarte Pinel. And then the other one, Yom Tov Atias, his Christian name was Jerónimo Vargas. The Ferrara Bible said that he is a Spaniard, which is not true. He was born in Porto Alegre, and the whole family was from Porto Alegre. We know that very well. There's a lot of documentation from other sources that speaks about that. So he was also born in Portugal. But he's passing here as a Spaniard, which is, of course, I guess, is a kind of a strategy, because how could two Portuguese translate the Bible into Spanish if they were Portuguese? Yeah? Or this is a marketing strategy, I guess. So one should be Portuguese, the other one should be a Spaniard. But also this example give us a clue about identity creation and how this identity between Castilian, Spaniards, Portugal was so fluent. Then, staying by the Jewish question, new Christians in Portugal were very important, and they were persecuted, more or less, by the Inquisition. They were wealthy people, many of them. The big, wealthy merchant families were new Christian. Not only, they were also new Christian who were shoemakers and tailors, but there were also these big merchant families of new Christian descent. No? They went into the world. They went to India, to the Estado da India, they went to Macao, and they went also to the Spanish America at that time. And they went also to Amsterdam and other places to build their own communities. And the Portuguese Jewish community in Amsterdam would call herself the Nação, the nation. And this is very strong among new Christians, but not only. That means the notion what nation is, nación is, means something special for them. And I have a testimony from Chile, from the 17th century, in a trial by the Inquisition. This is a testimony by one who is a son of a Portuguese migrant, and he said he was asked about the nation, the term nation, and he said the nation. He said that in Portugal they call them of the nation to those of the race of the Jews. No, it was a kind of, I don't know, if you were Jewish or Christian, new Christian, not Jewish, to say the truth, if you were of converso or new Christian descent, you would be a member of the nation. Exactly, could be. And in Amsterdam, until today, Nassau, among in the community of Amsterdam, is the term. Also in Venice, they speak about the Nassau, and you will know, it is the Jewish community of Portuguese, Spanish Portuguese, Jewish community. But that gives us a clue about what nation could mean. And I have here another example from Puebla in Mexico, the city of Puebla de Los Angeles. I've been researching in this archive many times. This is a Spanish. This is a priest from Andalusia, and he says in his will that that Santiago, St. James, is the universal patron of the Spanish nation. So here we have also another notion what nation means. A community, a commonwealth, is bounding about people by different reasons, because of different reasons. But nation is, we are not in the 19th century where nation would mean the nation state. It's just a kind of synonym, but it's not the same. And in the case of the early modern time, it seems that nation has as a construction has two different origins. One is the Bible, because the Bible, especially the book of Genesis, speaks about the nation of the earth. And the Genesis begins with a kind of genealogy of nations. In Hebrew, Toledot. This genealogy of nations was very important for the legal understanding in the late medieval times. No, the Bible was very important for legal culture in the late medieval times and early modern times. So, but then, in the late medieval times, because of this reason, nation would begin to mean the community of merchants. The Florentine, the Genoese nation, the Portuguese nation, the Catalonian nation would be the group of merchants living perhaps in another place. In Rome, there was a street for the Florentine nation, another street for the Genoese nation, and so on. And the Spanish nation, Castilian nation, they would say, and Portuguese nation, of course. Also, if matters were in the 16th century that Portugal and Castile were indeed two different kingdoms, but very, very close to each other, at the end of this century, King Phillips he inherited the crown of Portugal. Like families inherit a property, because that's what kings do. And at the Cortes of Tomar, this parliament of Tomar, they did an agreement, the states of Portugal, the three different states of Portugal, with the king, very important to our question, that even though Portugal was integrated into the crown of the Habsburgs, Portugal will remain to be a separate kingdom. And nationals of the Kingdom of Castile could not be nationals in the Kingdom of Portugal, and vice versa. Portuguese will also not be nationals in the lands of the King of Castile, because of trade. The problem was also the states of Portugal. They were afraid that too many migrants from Castile would come into the spaces of the Portuguese monarchy. What indeed happens was quite the contrary. Portuguese invaded. So every corner So I was not surprised when Lourdes was talking to us and telling, there was a Portuguese. Portuguese were everywhere at that time. So, in particular, but everywhere. So here you have both territories. So to get an idea, this is because Spanish kings will say, or Habsburg would say, in our empire the sun never goes down. So, but the problem where, I am a Portuguese. Living, I will go back before, very, very short. I am a Portuguese living in a place under Castilian rule. I do have problems because if you have a problem as immigrant, these problems are rights and privilege. You may be there, you may work there, you may raise a family there, but you don't have so many rights and privilege as have the others, especially the Castilians. So, but there were chances to pass as a Castilian or to be closer to a Castilian if you were Portuguese. One was this thing that the Algarves, South Portugal, since the medieval times did have a special, very ambiguous situation. The other thing was for sure Galicia, and then the Raya, the so-called Raya, the border, because this border was very, very fluent. In a city like Badajoz, the main population was for sure of Portuguese origin, or intermarrying with people from Elvas, for example. No, a very strong connection, especially in the border. So, if you were from the Algarves, there was in Maria da Graça, which is speaking today also, Maria da Graça Ventura. She has written a very interesting article about this. Many Portuguese migrants will say, we are from the Algarves, which, as you know, is a kingdom of Castile, belongs to Castile. For example, here, this is from a notarial record in Puebla de Los Angeles, in nowadays Mexico, no? Is someone in his will, a Gaspar Martin, saying that his parents are deceased. They were neighbors of the city of Tavira in the Algarves, kingdoms of Castile, where I am native. He wants to pass a Castilian. That is typical for many. So, I have a lot of examples of this phenomena, but I am only introducing this here. No, these two. This is from court records, also from Puebla, and someone saying, for being of the say Algarve, of the crown of Castile. Yeah, which is at that time is easier because, of course, also the king of Castile is king in Portugal, but Algarves are belong not to the crown of Castile. It's a kind of ambiguity here working on, but it's getting worse. Galicia. Galicia is another place where you will pass as a native of when you are a Portuguese. For example, I have this, and this is an example from Chile. This is a Portuguese migrant in Chile saying this. He's native from Lessa of Matosinhos near Porto, no? A port city. In Chile, many Portuguese came from Lessa de Matosinhos, from this region. Many of them, which I have tracked, come from this region. But he says here, this is a statement made by him before he went in a trip to Lima. He said, although in my will I say that I am from Bayona, in the city that is, I don't know, he wrote that, of Galicia. Bayona is a city, no, in the region of Tui, a very important city at that time. And he said, in my will, I have a will, and in this will, I did say I am from Bayona in Galicia. He repented now, and he said, and he gives the reason why. I say this because if I die, justice does not enter into my property. Because you, huh? Yeah, of course.
Was it the norm in those times when you're doing the will or legal document to say where you're from?
Yeah, you should. You should. And in this case, very important, because if you were from foreign origin, as he well know, justice will come and take all your belongings, your inheritance, and put it into the state. So, because foreigners couldn't do a will in the Indies, you as a foreigner, you have not right to make a will. That's the problem here.
So you can just say, I am so-and-so from here, and...
Exactly. But here, we know that because the royal officers, they knew that, and this is in the Archive of Indies. This is an inquirement done by the officials to know his origin. Because this Portuguese was very rich, perhaps the most richest person in the 17th century Chilean kingdom. So the royal officials wanted to have this money, and he was already died, he was already dead, and they wanted to seize the property of him.
And did they succeed?
Did they succeed? Just in part, because he has an heir, a Chilean heir, a son of a Portuguese born in Chile, and this heir took most of the money. Yeah, so in part they succeed, but not. So the thing of the border or the raya, there's a very good research about that done by Pilar Huerga Criado. It's a book about the raya of Portugal, conversos in the raya. It's mostly about Portuguese conversos in the border, but I guess it applies for every Portuguese living in the border. And I have found also information about that, also in Puebla, where someone, also in his will, says, this is Simón López Claveros, no? He lives in a town near Puebla and says, I am a native of the town of Monsanto, border of Portugal and Castile, bishopric of La Guardia in the Kingdom of Spain. No? It's the same phenomena.
I know a case from Almeida says the same thing. Almeida, which is in the Portuguese, in the Kingdom of Spain.
In the Kingdom of Spain. Yeah, this is, but it gets worse because Lisbon is also in the Kingdom of Spain. I have many examples of this, which is the first time I saw a document saying that, I was very much surprised, but at the end I found many other sources saying the same. This is a dowry, a chart of dowry, where Luis de Silva, he says, I am a native of the city of Lisbon in the Kingdom of Spain. And names his father and his mother, which are perfectly Portuguese. Yeah, Antonio da Gama and Beatriz da Silva, very Portuguese, no? And then from the city of Potosí, these documents from Potosí, nowadays Bolivia, are very important because Potosí was the main center for silver mining. And the theory says that Portuguese wanted silver. The main trade of Portuguese merchants is to get silver and to bring this silver to China or to Portugal. Depends, no? Through the Pacific to China, to the Manila Galleon, and also through Portugal or through Africa, through the slave trade, no? And these Portuguese people, these are burial records from Potosí. A lot of them saying that they are native from the Kingdom of Spain. For example, the first one saying, I am a native of Viana, no? Northern Portugal, Kingdom of Portugal, in Spain. I am a native of Lisbon, Kingdoms of Spain. I am a native of Lisbon in the Kingdom of Spain, native of the city of Lisbon in the Kingdom of Portugal, Kingdom of Spain. So you see, there is a kind of play of ambiguity. They are playing with ambiguity. They say it's the Kingdom of Portugal, but also the Kingdom of Spain. And this is after the Portuguese Guerra de Restauração, the Portuguese Revolution. So it's not more the times of the Habsburg, but they are living in the Spanish America. Then, I'm finishing, I guess. What means being a Spaniard then, or being Spanish? Well, this is also complicated, this is complex. I don't have answers to that. What I wanted is to show you the real documents, what they say. This is very interesting because it's a court record also from Puebla. The witness is a Portuguese, but they say that the witness is a Spaniard. No? His name is Domingo Álvarez, and we know he is a native of the city of Barcelos in Portugal, but is identified as Spaniard, because here Spaniard means something like European. This is very, very common, especially in ecclesiastical sources, also in legal sources. You would be identified, for example, in a marriage record as a Spaniard, as mulatto, as black, or as Indian, or as mestizo. But there is no difference between a Portuguese, an Italian, a German. Those documents will write always Spaniard, Español. Yeah, like also in Arabia, so Frank means or European. And here, but, and this is very nice. This is the nicest document I have found in Puebla. There is a little Indian working on a field, and he heard a Portuguese talking to a pair of black slave boys there, and he needed a translator, but Juan Diego was the little Indian. He said, "Oh, I saw how a Spanish-Portuguese young man, o mozo, no? O mozo español portugués." So that means also that for people looking from outside, this construction of identity was hard. Was hard to figure out who they are really, how to give a name to Portuguese migrants. So, and the same here, also from Puebla, witnesses, they will be identified as a Spanish man, a Spanish man, a Spanish man, but then, you know, these people are, one is from Lisbon, the other one is a native in Lisbon in the Kingdom of Portugal, and the other is a neighbor of the city of Braga, but identifies as Spanish, no? Hombre español, hombre español, hombre español. Coming to the end, the question of the naturalization charts, so that you will have a document saying that you are naturalized in a place, are very, very rare. So was not a common, was rare. I have found two big collections of naturalization charts. Archivo de Indias in Sevilla, there's a whole bunch of them in a volume with many Portuguese, also flamencos and Germans and others. And the other one in the City Council of Madrid. And the City Council for Madrid, the interesting thing is they are naturalization charts very old from the late medieval, so 15th century, very old. And the interesting thing is that in this City Council of Madrid, the people being naturalized are not really foreigners. They are also Castilian from other cities in Castilla, wanted to live and dwell in Madrid. which means naturalization has in its origin nothing to do with foreigners, but with change of exactly. It's more that, and that you may enjoy the privilege people living in the city have, no? And in this sense was very important for trade. If you go and see the naturalization charts, I have an example here, in the Archive of Seville, they are permission to trade, to make trade. They are not important because another reason, but for trade, to be a merchant. Here I have one from Juan Rodriguez, also Joao Rodriguez, Joao Rodriguez Mesa. He was an important trade and merchant in Cartagena de Indias. Also later on he will have a process by the Inquisition. And here we see the main characteristic of these charts, no? The people, the name of the person granted, the city where he lives, no? He's a native of Extremos, in my kingdom of Portugal, no, he's not a Castilian, but he has been dwelling in Castile more than 20 years. And this is an important clue. Naturalization charts are for people living a long time in a place. So not just 5 years, no, 20 years, 30 years, no? People that lives a long, that remain a long time in a place, and they have an established house, Casa Poblada, which is very...
Sometimes it was 5 years, sometimes it was 10, sometimes it was 20.
Could be.
It's crazy.
Yeah, but yeah, these are from the Archive of Indies. It perhaps are different from those of the city councils, but I to deal and contract. This is to do trade. To trade. That's the question. So I guess we are finishing. Last thing is our compositions or composiciones. There was a way you, as a foreigner, would remain in a place, and this was a simple tool by paying a fee. These fees were called composiciones, no? And I have here an example from composiciones done in the city of Panama in the 1620s. You see Portuguese were, most of them, 19 Portuguese, and here I brought the others, so you may have an idea of other foreigners living in a place like Panama, no? And the Portuguese, of course, they did pay the highest amount of money for the compositions, because these composiciones were a mean of getting money by the crown, and the crown was always needy of money, so it was a very common, no, tool to do that, or way to do that. And then this is the text of a composition, Felipe Rodriguez, I guess also living in Panama, no? Felipe Rodriguez, he pays, and he said, I have paid twice the composition. The first time I paid 150 pesos, and the second, the double, no, 300 pesos. So as you see, this was a very simple way to allow someone, a Portuguese in this case, to remain as a foreigner in a place. You have to pay, but you did not receive a naturalization charge. You were just tolerated in this place. And I guess I ended with that. I don't know why. Thank you very much.
Right, so we started about 20 minutes late, and we have about 5 minutes before our next speaker enters on the Zoom, maybe 12. Okay. Okay, so we have 5 minutes for questions, not more than that, because you have to decide who is the next speaker. Okay, so again. Sr. Cônsul, Professor João Paulo Oliveira Costa.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your excellent presentation. For me, this is all new. Please bear with me. I'm a lawyer, so not an historian, so probably this won't make any sense. But I found the history of Francisco de Menezes very interesting. He was a Portuguese, he was governor of Chile, and he finalized this commission in 1668, which is the year of the Treaty of Lisbon that put an end to the war of independence between Portugal and Spain. And my question is about the political significance of nationality in the 16th century, because Portugal was a part of the Spanish Empire, though it was an independent nation, but many of the Portuguese were colonial administrators within the Spanish Empire. So the question is, to what extent can the Portuguese, or could the Portuguese nationality be used by Spanish oppositors or detractors as a political weapon against certain persons? Because when you read some of the criticisms, Francisco de Menezes was truly a very polemical figure in Chile. So to what extent would be prejudicial to be a Portuguese in the Spanish Main, given the fact that many times Portuguese were highly successful and had a lot of advantages when trading in the Spanish Empire? My second issue is just an observation on the issue of the kingdoms of Spain and Lisbon as part of the kingdoms of Spain. I don't see there, perhaps I'm wrong, but I don't see there an ambiguity, because in fact, when you look at history, Portugal is perceived as one of the medieval kings of the Iberian Peninsula. So Portugal is a kingdom of Hispania, such as Castile, as Aragon, as Leon, Navarre, from then on. So, and one of the last examples was Lisbon, Kingdom of Portugal, Kingdoms of Spain. So the plural here, for me, it's not innocent, but perhaps I'm wrong. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was our General Counsel of Portugal in San Francisco. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very, very important questions. The first one, there were parties, we know there were parties in Castile, in Madrid, and also different parties struggling in Lisbon. In the case of Madrid, in the 17th century, in the time of King Philip IV, which is the third, I guess, in Portugal, the Conde Duque de Olivares, the prime minister, he wanted an integration of the kingdoms. It seems like that he has this great project to unite the kingdoms in many ways. And he favored, he favored Portuguese people, especially people in finance, because Genoese were going back and Portuguese finance people became the more important economic supporter of the monarchy. So the Conde Duque wanted these people to be integrated, but he has a strong opposition. And the same was happening in Portugal, in Lisbon, mostly because of the issue of the Cristianos Novos. In Lisbon, this favoring from the crown to the Cristianos Novos was seen also as a kind of threat. So you have different parties, and I guess they are aware, and perhaps also the war of, well, there are many important people who have studied that. The war of independence in Portugal has to do also with these different parties having different opinions, no? And about the ambiguity of the Kingdom of Spain, is true, but it's also not true, because the normal is that in a document you will find a formulation like Lisboa in the Kingdom of Portugal. This is 99% of the appearance of this formulation. What I show here are exceptions. You know, it's obvious to me that it's it's a game, it's something there. Iberia was also Portugal, but was not at that time. Español would mean people from Castile or Aragon. So I guess it's complex, no? That is my point.
So much. We have time just for one question more, because at noon we're supposed to have Professor Carla Rahn coming in. I apologize, we only have one question. Maybe in the end you can talk. My apologies, we're really short on time. We have to skip or rearrange already the order of the questions. So Professor João Paulo Oliveira Costa, you order, if you please.
Thank you. My point is the same of Mr. Consul, the Consul of Portugal. I think that I understand that those are exceptions. So, and it's very interesting because you are speaking about people where it is far away from Iberian Peninsula, where everything is so far away. But to check well, as is pointed out, is nobody until the 18th century called himself Iberian. Nowadays, if I say I'm an Iberian, everybody understands. If I say I'm Hispanic, I had the right to say, but it was stolen from me by the people in Madrid, by the Bourbons. The Bourbons stole to the Portuguese the right to say we are Spaniards, because we are from the peninsula. And so what should be interesting is to see if before the 18th century you find any time the expression Iberians, which was the expression that solved the problem of the exaggeration of Philip V, the Bourbon, that thought he was king of Spain, what he was not. So that's just, but it's very interesting because nevertheless they say kingdoms. Kingdoms, it means that they are aware that is something different. So this is very much. Thank you so much. I want to read this again several times and to process.
Thanks so much, Professor.
What strikes me is that, also what I said, normally you will expect, what they say is, I am a Portuguese. And a Spaniard would say, I am a Español, and they would say, oh, he's an Spaniard for an Español. Saying that someone is Spaniard or is in the Kingdom of Spain because he's Portuguese is weird in this context. And I guess we have to see the whole context, but it's true. And the other thing that strikes me is that news, they spread very, very, very quick in the empire. So books and news, they travel so quick. But that is another, I guess, another conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Let's say thank you so much, Professor. It was a great talk. Appreciate it. Okay, so we're planning to switch the order of the presentations. I don't know if Professor Carla Rahn is online, if you're listening.
The beginning of a...
Not yet.
Well, let's see.
I think we gave you permission to share your monitor from our computer. I believe.
How's that?
Okay, you are on. Yay, thank you.
Okay, now these wretched, yeah, here we go.
All right, thank you so much, Professor.
So I need to start. There we go. Yeah, Zoom is interesting. And there should be a picture of me somewhere, and if there's not, that's too bad, as long as you can see my screen. It's a pleasure to introduce you to the wonderful recreation of Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo's San Salvador, which was built by the Maritime Museum of San Diego. Ray Ashley, president and CEO of the museum, initiated the project in 2007. Because I have a long-term association with the museum, Ray asked me to chair the historical advisory team as the project took shape. I'm a professional historian, and history, like other academic disciplines, requires rigorous training, not only in historical content, but also in methodology. Throughout my career, I've focused on European history of the 16th and 17th centuries, especially Spain, and to a lesser extent, Portugal, but also Portugal, especially in my recent work. For the past 30 years or so, most of my work has concerned maritime history, including ships like the original San Salvador that Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo sailed and ended up visiting San Diego Bay in late September of 1542. That's why I was very pleased to accept Ray's invitation. The voyage of the original San Salvador is very important to San Diego history. However, It was only a small part of the Spanish effort to understand the winds and currents of the vast Pacific Ocean. That was so that Spanish voyages could sail to and from Asia without intruding on the route that was assigned to Portuguese voyages by the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494. The westward route across the Pacific from Spanish America to Asia was discovered in the 1520s, but the eastward return route would not be discovered until 1565 by Andrés de Urdaneta. On this map, you can see the earliest Spanish voyages into the Pacific. You can see Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo's brief voyage up the west coast, and Urdaneta's track across the North Pacific Ocean more than 40 years later. To recreate San Salvador, we had to investigate the historical record to learn what type and size of ship it was. That was the first thing. There were various types of ships used by Spanish mariners in the early 16th century. Among them, the caravel, the carrack, the nao, which was a generic term that usually referred to a fairly large merchant ship, and an early form of the galleon. Although Spanish mariners sailed various types of ships in the early 16th century, one crucial text by Gonzalo Fernandes de Oviedo told us that San Salvador was a galleon of about 200 toneladas in the measurements of the time. Toneladas denoted both volume and carrying capacity of a ship, and the word tonelada and the concept has no equivalent in any modern indication of a ship's size. A lot of confusion surrounds that idea. You see that text of Gonzalo Fernandes de Oviedo here in the original Spanish, and you see my English translation here with key passages in bold type and yellow highlighting. Fernandes de Oviedo's text is doubly crucial because it is the only evidence we have about the type and size of the ship that Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo built and sailed. To calculate the likely configurations of our recreated San Salvador, I started with the 5 key dimensions for ships of the period. Those dimensions are the manga, which was the, or beam, which is the broadest point in the ship, the quilla or keel, the eslora or length on the highest plank deck, the plan or floor just above the keel, and the puntal or depth in the hole between the lowest plank deck and the floor. With those 5 key dimensions, I then used the formula in the early 16th century for gauging toneladas and worked backward from our figure of, quote, more than 200 toneladas, close quote, to estimate a range for the 5 key dimensions of our recreated San Salvador. You see the results here. With ranges for dimensions, ranges for toneladas, and then those dimensions translated into modern displacement tons and gross registered tons. And those are the 2 dimensions that a modern gauging would use. At that point, I handed the estimates to Doug Sharp, a brilliant naval architect in San Diego, whom Ray Ashley enticed into joining the project. Doug had designed lots of yachts, that's what he does, but he had never before designed a 16th century galleon. He had to figure out how to take into account that our San Salvador would have 2 diesel engines, as well as a full complement of sails. It would have different ways to ballast the ship, and there were all sorts of other differences. You see Doug here showing one of the computer-generated models that he produced in his state-of-the-art design studio. To get to that point, he started with detailed plans, such as these, and a series of 3-dimensional computer models, which he sent around to those of us involved in the project. Here's one of them. At some point, I don't remember when, I emailed back that the model that he was sending around was looking about right for the 16th century. At that point, in the 16th century, however, Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo would have had none of the modern tools that Doug relied on. Shipwrights would start, as I had done, with the approximate size of the ship that they had been told to build. They'd decide on the dimensions for a ship of that size, sort of the way I reverse engineered the formula, and then they would apply traditional methods, traditional tools, and their expertise to produce a finished hull. For the sail plan of Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo San Salvador, records during the voyage suggested and confirmed that it would have had 3 masts and a bowsprit, with 2 courses of rectangular sails on the fore and main masts, a triangular or lateen sail on the mizzen mast, which was farthest aft, and a spritsail or sprit sail on the bowsprit. You see here a page from the record of the voyage, and believe me, this is beautiful handwriting. You almost never see handwriting this good in the 16th century, certainly not in the 17th. Diego Garcia de Palacios' Instrucción Náutica of 1587 is the earliest treatise on shipbuilding in Spanish America that we have. And it provided very nice illustrations of sails. They were made of strips of heavy canvas that were sewn together, and then they had fittings attached to the finished sails to attach them to the masts. An interesting feature of the sails is shown in these illustrations. The letters A, M, G, P on both the lower mainsail and on its extension or bonnet, A, M, G, P. Whoops, how did that happen? Those letters helped sailors to attach the bonnet properly by matching the letters on both pieces of bulky heaps of canvas that they would be dealing with. The letter stood for the beginning of a popular prayer, Ave Maria, gratia plena, or Hail Mary, full of grace, so that the sailors were praying as they worked, which is proof that the modern world did not invent multitasking. Our recreation chose not to include that detail, but it's fascinating nonetheless. With the shape and dimensions of the hull and the sail plan settled, construction could begin. However, first came a complicated and difficult arrangement to secure financing, place to build the ship, sources of timber and massive machines, and so on. All of this was accomplished through heroic efforts on the part of Ray Ashley, the museum's board of directors, the United Port of San Diego, the California Coastal Conservancy, local and regional foundations, and an enormous list of additional sponsors. Without their contributions, San Salvador would have existed only on Doug Sharp's computer. Instead, San Salvador, as a recreation, began to come to life on April 15, 2011, when the keel was laid at Spanish Landing close to the San Diego airport. I was delighted to attend the keel laying. We could all stamp our initials into pieces of the keel, which was fun. And you see me here. I don't know if I can do the my pointer, with Professor Iris Engstrand, who is an expert on the exploration and history of California. The basic framing took place during the rest of the year, with the framing ribs attached to the keel, much as they would have been attached in 1539 under Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo's supervision in Ixtapa, Guatemala, which was in the Viceroyalty of New Spain. One major difference in the recreation of San Salvador was the need for lead ballast. A local aerospace firm donated and cast the required ballast, which was a most welcome contribution to the build. And you see here, approximately 175,000 pounds of lead ballast. Another difference was that our galleon would be certified by the United States Coast Guard to carry passengers, so that Coast Guard inspectors regularly showed up at the build site to see that the work would be in compliance with their rigorous specifications. Although the modern shipwrights use power tools that 16th century shipwrights could not even have dreamed of, much hand labor was involved as well. Two of the master shipwrights, Don Davis and Peter Wilson, were involved from beginning to end in this project. And they served as a source of endless inspiration to all of us who volunteered. You see Don Davis and Peter Wilson here. I assume that at least some of you in the audience have done some woodworking, and you may recall how difficult it can be to shave wood properly with a jack plane. On numerous occasions when I was volunteering, I watched Peter shave a 16-foot beam with a jack plane in one long curl, and that was only one tiny part of his skill set. Frank Townsend was another master shipwright who specializes in traditional shipbuilding methods. You see him here in the upper left picture pounding oakum into the seams of the deck. He would later top off the seams with melted tar, melted at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Caulking the seams in that traditional method means that tar can be added as needed. If you use modern caulking methods and materials, you can't top it off, but instead you have to dig the old material out and replace it when you need to do that, which is very expensive and time-consuming. The seams between the hull planking of San Salvador also had to be stuffed with oakum and tarred. And in that process, on the left, you see a caulker at work in 1529 with a chisel and a caulking mallet. On the right, you see Frank spinning oakum for our San Salvador, and then a modern caulker at work. His tools and actions are strikingly similar to those of his 16th century counterpart. And I am hoping that you are not seeing the thumbnail videos. Nobody told me, so I hope you weren't. But the methods by this modern caulker and the one in 1529 are strikingly similar, even though 500 years separates them. In addition to shipwrights and other professionals such as electricians, our recreation of San Salvador eventually attracted more than 400 volunteers, and their unpaid labor became increasingly important as the budget got tighter and tighter. I don't live in San Diego, but I volunteered whenever I was in town and did whatever was required. I sanded and stained beams and rails. I broke up blocks of tar to be melted for caulking. I cut tree nails or trunnels with a drill press and hammered them into the deck planking. I swept wood shavings, tidied up tool supplies, did whatever else I was asked to do while trying to keep out of the way of the more skilled workers. The volunteers I met were an impressive sampling of citizens, not only from San Diego, but from elsewhere as well. One day, in fact, I worked stripping paint alongside an orthopedic surgeon on his day off. Another day, I painted the cradles that would hold the diesel engines, along with Lynn Eddy, who was a master painter at the museum. There was always something interesting to do. Some of the volunteers came for only a day or two. Others contributed thousands of hours to making the ship a reality and learned skills that they would never have acquired in their normal lives. I remember one young woman who became a real pro at driving a forklift, to her immense delight. The net result of having so many volunteers meant that a sizable number of local residents developed a stake in the success of the ship. Part of the arrangement for using Spanish landing for the build was that cyclists and walkers were allowed to pass through the area outside the chain link fence, but in full view of the ship as it took shape. When people stopped to watch or ask questions, the master shipwrights and volunteers alike were encouraged to engage with them. This added to the interest that the ship generated in San Diego, but it also helps to explain why the build took 4 years. Whereas Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo built the original San Salvador and 7 or 8 other vessels in just over a year, admittedly with a very large crew. This picture shows San Salvador nearing completion, without the scaffolding and with some of the volunteers. The ship was officially commissioned in 2015. In the lower right-hand picture, you can see the crowd attending the event. And in the little circle in the center, you can see Captain Ray Ashley waving to the people on shore. Since its commissioning, San Salvador has proven to be an excellent ship under sail, which is a tribute to Doug Sharp's design. And when Ray is aboard as captain, he aims to use the sails as much as possible, rather than cranking up the engines. Members of the well-trained sail crew are all volunteers, although they use traditional skills to shift the sails in response to commands. The major concession to safety is that they do not climb into the rigging to furl and unfurl the sails. That would be too dangerous without foot ropes on the spars, and foot ropes did not exist in the early 16th century. Instead, David Clark, who trains the sail crews and is an expert in rigging, devised a fascinating method so that the sails can be furled and unfurled from the deck. Since 2015, San Salvador has traveled up and down the California coast at regular intervals, acting as a visible reminder that the history of what would become the United States began nearly a century before English refugees from religious persecution landed at Plymouth Rock in 1620. Central to San Salvador's mission has been a series of Pacific heritage tours that bring the stories of Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo and his voyage to thousands of people in each of the ports that the ship visits. For example, the year that San Salvador visited Santa Barbara during the city's Old Spanish Days Festival, which is held every August, more than 800 people visited the ship each day for free tours. Thereafter, San Salvador spent 10 days in Morro Bay, and more than 1,000 people toured the ship each day for a total of roughly 12,000 tickets sold. In addition, because the vessel is certified by the Coast Guard to carry passengers, it does. I was lucky enough to be included as a lecturer on one of the Pacific Voyage tours, Pacific Heritage tours that sailed for a week between Oxnard and San Diego. In addition to the regular volunteer crew, about a dozen paying guests were able to experience life on board a 16th century galleon, though in much greater comfort than those on board experienced in 1542. San Salvador also visited Mexico in 2018. Through the Pacific Heritage Tours and the permanent berth that San Salvador has at the Maritime Museum, the ship makes an important contribution to the cultural life and historical consciousness of thousands of visitors, whether they live nearby or are only short-term tourists to San Diego. San Salvador also serves as a focal point for educational outreach, and educational outreach is one of the central missions of the museum. In addition to numerous visits by school children and their teachers, the museum hosts regular workshops for groups of teachers and provides instructional materials such as you see here as resources for their classes. Overall, San Salvador continues to fulfill the hopes of Ray Ashley and everyone else who was involved with the recreation of the historic galleon that Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo sailed in to San Diego Bay in 1542. I hope you enjoy your visit to San Salvador and to the Maritime Museum of San Diego. Thank you. Now,
All right, so a couple minutes for a few questions maybe. I hope we don't have feedback now. Professor Rahn, you can still hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? I'm trying to turn off my...
You can still hear us, Professor Carla Rahn?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I'm not sure if she's on or still.
Oh, dear.
Is she on still, or did she disconnect from Zoom? We have some questions, maybe.
I am here, and...
Oh, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Very good. We have a couple questions.
Okay.
That's okay with you?
It's fun.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for your presentation, especially for those of us who sail. This was fascinating. So a quick question. I know that in the 16th century, they had quite a bit of problem with the worms burrowing into the hull. Are there any treatments or precautions used to prevent that from happening so fast in this replica?
In the replica, no. In the reconstruction, no. And I am not sure. I do not think that Cabrillo used the kind of thin lead sheets nailed onto the hull that were developed to try to combat shipworm. Shipworm in the tropics, of course, was a horrible problem. And later on, the ships that I've dealt with that were built in the 17th century certainly had lead sheathing, very, very thin sheets of lead that were hammered onto the hull below the waterline. But I am unaware if Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo used that on the original San Salvador.
Thank you.
Another question? Steve, please.
Hello there. Thank you for your presentation. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference between the 15th century and the 16th century tar and modern tar?
Oh boy. Well, tar is, the short answer is no. Tar is tar. As far as I'm concerned, what they used in the 16th century was not just raw tar. What they used was something that was called betun. And betun was a combination between, say, tar or pitch from pine trees, for example, and then some kind of grease from fish, for example. And it was less, it was less viscous than modern tar. I mean, obviously, what we used on the reconstruction was solid tar. It came in drums, and I helped to break up some of it, and it was like rock. And then you would melt it at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. As far as I know, in the shipbuilding techniques of the 16th century, they used something that was less, it wasn't solid. It was thick enough that it would hold the oakum in. It was thick enough that it would waterproof the hull, but it was not like modern tar, as far as I know.
Okay, so we are running short on time. Let's just say thank you again to this amazing presentation. Thank you so much, Professor Carol Phillips. Okay, so I hope the feedback disappears. Good with the Zoom. So let's move for our next presentation, which will be by Professor Mary Duggan from Keene State College about the Portuguese of Macao and Spain's China trade route through the Santa Barbara Channel. We have to switch the order of the presentations because of the timing of the Zoom. Professor Marie Christine Duggan has a PhD in political economy from the New School and taught microeconomics at Keene State College in New Hampshire for 20 years, where she now teaches business and society. She was raised in Berkeley before moving to the East Coast. In 2022-2023, she spent a sabbatical year in Mexico City, and she's completing a book on Iberian mercantile actors of the Pacific Rim who played the role in California's economy from 1680 to 1845. She has found that the Portuguese community in Macao was a linchpin of the Pacific Rim trade. And let's give our welcome. Thank you so much, Professor Marie Duggan, for being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I am grateful to all of you for including me today. I had become very interested in the Portuguese after doing this research. I'd been to Portugal twice, but really this research told me that there was a Portuguese community in Goa and Macao that had had an influence on California's past, and I knew nothing about that. And I also want to thank my friend Deborah Besseghini, who is a historian of the Pacific in Italy, and she sent me the message saying, do you know these people are getting together in San Diego? So that was very nice. So that's right. I grew up in Berkeley, and I never heard of a single Hispanic or Iberian merchant. I had heard only of traders from New England in the 1830s, Bryant and Sturgis. And over time, I came to realize that was there's a very skewed image, since the Pacific had the Manila Galleon since 1566. And I wanted to find out who these people were. So we like maps. I like seeing a map of the Pacific. And these are the places that I found important in California's development. I keep Santa Barbara in there because it was the center of the Hispanic mercantile activity between 1769 and 1830. But San Francisco was also on the route that I'm going to talk about. So I like to study California. I've sort of realized that here's this map of the Pacific Rim, and if we were to fold it together and eliminate the ocean, we would find that Nanking and Monterey would come together. And I realized that the people had an influence on each other. People in California often wore Nanking cloth in the 18th century. And Japan is only about 30 days from California by sail in the 18th century. So I started with this research question: what is the influence of Asia on California's economic development? 1680 to 1845. So initially I was looking at the Spaniards in Manila and in Mexico City. But gradually, as I did the research, I realized that the Portuguese in Macao were very important in everything that happened in Manila. The Portuguese got to Macao 50 years before the Spaniards got to Manila. And the Spaniards always relied upon the Portuguese as having deeper connections to Asia. There were, Portuguese in Macao who had married into Chinese families by the time Manila was established. And the Spaniards of Manila were not supposed to sail to the mainland of China, though maybe sometimes they did, but they relied more on the Macanese. And that was a long program. So the reason for this map is I guess I wanted to show you, let's see if I can do it. What do I have to put to get a?
The side cursor, side arrows to move to the next slide, or the red one?
This one, the red one. So California was this whole thing in a writings from 1745. California didn't just mean this little bit. First of all, it includes Baja, but it also goes all the way up here in some writings. And here's Nootka Sound. This is the Spanish Empire in 1795. All right, now this is the first time I noticed a California commercial link. So I'm really going to talk more about 1830, but I guess I wanted to mention these things, that Vizcaíno came to California in 1602, and many of us know that the Spanish king ordered the occupation of Monterey in 1606, and it never happened. But I think it was new to me to realize that Vizcaíno went to Japan in 1611, and he had hoped to map the southern coast of Japan also so that he could be a merchant. He was a Manila galleon merchant before that. Some people think he was put on Baja California in the story that Lourdes Ita discussed this morning and had some experience there. At any rate, the Portuguese had better relations with the Japanese. The Portuguese Jesuits had learned Japanese and did not always go about town looking like Jesuits, whereas the Spaniards wanted to get in on the trade, and they came more obviously wanting to convert people, and this destabilized the situation. It's not the only thing that destabilized the situation, but when that fell apart, Japan decided not to do trade with any Portuguese or Spaniards and just to work with the Dutch. This meant that there wasn't really much reason to settle Monterey anymore. So that whole story in Asia had a pretty big impact on what happened in California. So another time I see the Portuguese, which I mention because I'm hoping maybe somebody here might like to collaborate in exploring this further. There's a series of letters between the Jesuits of Macao and the Duchess of Aveiro in Portugal in around 1680. And this is the Queen Regent of Spain, Mariana. And she is the one who gave the order to settle California in 1674. It took me a long time to figure that out. And it was because British pirates were pouring over the Isthmus of Panama. But when she made that decision, she relied heavily on the Duchess of Aveiro. And the letters are published because someone was writing about Keene, but there's so much more information in there about Mariana's policies in the Pacific. And the one thing that Mariana and the Duchess of Aveiro agreed on with also Leonor Carreto, who was the Viceroy's wife of New Spain, but we should really call her the Vice-Reine, the Vice-Reina. They had all served together for Philip IV and had personal connections. And they decided to settle Guam probably because they dreamed of reestablishing a tie to Japan. They thought they could train Jesuits in Guam to go to Japan. Okay, so moving right, and the other place where we hear about the Portuguese that no one has really investigated adequately is that in 1789 there was the Nootka Sound incident where Esteban Martinez from the San Blas Navy captured, I think it's 3, but maybe 4 British ships and brought them to San Blas with the help. He was working in concert with an American, Juan Kendrick, who later joined the San Blas Navy. But the interesting thing is that 2 of the British ships had Portuguese captains and Portuguese flags. Now, the story is told as if this was just a ruse, but it isn't just a ruse, it's a partnership between the British in India and the Portuguese it deserves a little more exploration. This was probably the first time that people had sailed from Macao to Nootka, so it was opening a new route. Okay, so the main part of my story, the part where I've actually nailed down a lot of the details, is the story of Juan Nepomuceno Machado de Souza, who was born in Manila in 1797, held a British passport, and he was trained as a young man in Calcutta. And how he got a British passport, nobody really knows. And he spoke English very well. And he built in Mazatlan a port for trading silver to Asia in 1825. So in Calcutta, he was training with the Royal Philippine Company. One of the factors was Francisco Javier Irizarry was one of the factors of the Royal Philippine Company. He was an incredibly wealthy boss. You have to think of one of the largest capitalists in the world at the time. And okay, but I was going to talk about his birth. So he was born to Sabina de Souza. Now, Sabina de Souza is an important person in Manila, and he was also born to Juan Antonio Machado, but we never hear another word about him. Sabina de Souza is the person of importance. The de Souza family had quite a bit of extensive commercial and family ties between Indonesia, Calcutta, Macao and Manila, and as we see then, into West Mexico. So he also has a brother, Benito Machado, who comes to Mazatlan later. And Benito Machado is far more Portuguese than is Juan Nepomuceno in his daily life. I mean, Juan Nepomuceno also, is of Portuguese descent, but you see him speaking English a lot in his writing. And Benito Machado is more someone who speaks Spanish and Portuguese. And he's the one that actually sails across the Pacific for Juan Nepomuceno. Now, okay. I mean, I guess the thing that I was very impressed with is that Benito Machado de Sousa here was the, he's the captain of a ship called the Joven Dorotea, which sails Macao, San Francisco to Mazatlan, and they depart in 1831. I think they depart Mazatlan in 1831 for Macao, and then he comes back in 1834. And it was quite a difficult voyage. So this is San Francisco at that time, 1830. All right, so this is a time when the Spanish Empire is collapsing, right? So this is why Benito Machado is born in Manila, but he's trained in Calcutta with the Royal Philippine Company. The Manila Galleon is kind of collapsing. The Mexico City mercantile community used to run the Manila Galleon, and they're losing their hold on the Manila Galleon. The Royal Philippine Company really establishes Calcutta as a more important mercantile community than Manila by this time. But the Spaniards and the Portuguese are critical in Calcutta. And why is that? Well, it's really because the British are raising opium, but they don't want to show up in China with opium because it's illegal. And the British government at that time did not want to go to war with China. So what the British want to do is they want to sell the opium for silver. And where does the silver come from? It comes from, I think largely at this time, it's coming from Sinaloa and Sonora in the Gulf of California. But anyway, it's coming from New Spain. So New Spain is gone now at a certain point, and there's Mexico. So when he first starts out in Calcutta, and he must have been like 1815, New Spain still exists, right? Because independent Mexico was born in 1821, but the Manila Galleon stops sailing in 1815. So at that point, it becomes unstable how you're going to get silver from New Spain to Calcutta. And that's the whole role of the Machado de Sousa family, is to get silver to Calcutta and then to smuggle opium into mainland China for the British. So at this point in time, we come to, the British were raising the opium. Later, Jardine Matheson is the major dominant British house in Asia, and they actually start the first opium war in 1839. But in the early 1820s, Irizarry and Company was much more important than Jardine Matheson. And in fact, James Matheson started out as an employee of Irizarry and Company, and he was about the same age as Juan Nepomuceno Machado, so they knew each other. All right, now, I wanted to say that this research is by Ander Permanye Ugartemendia, who is a Basque East Asian specialist who speaks Chinese, and he's the one who's figured out the early, what's happening in Calcutta. Now, this is the route. Now, my sister is a geologist, so she made the maps, and I would just mention to this company that I have not actually seen a map that confirms this is the route. So if anyone ever comes across an old map from 1830 that shows this route, that would be great. So But what they often talk about is going through the Straits of Malacca. They're getting the opium here. Now, they could stop in Manila, but I don't think they did. I think this was the route, and then Manila to Macao. And if I had known that I was presenting to the Portuguese, I would have written Macao, because I really think Macao was more important. And maybe I understand that a little bit better now. But down here, you see the relationship between Canton, Macao, and Hong Kong. But certainly for Irizarry and Company in the early 1820s, Macao was the key thing. Now later, as Jardine Matheson grows in the 1830s, Canton becomes the center of finance. So, you know, my fellow Juan Nepomuceno Machado de Souza and his brother Benito, who are they? We do know that in 1823, Joaquim de Souza was a top opium trader in Macao, and he used a ship called the General Quiroga. In 1825, he was the Macao agent for Irizarry and Company. And since by then, Juan Nepomuceno Machado de Souza was employed by Irizarry and Company, you know, I assume that they were some sort of kin. Now, after a while, the job of Juan Nepomuceno Machado de Souza is to sail with FX Espeleta. So Francisco Javier Espeleta de Irizarry was the cousin of the incredibly wealthy Basque, Francisco Javier Irizarry. And so Francisco Espeleta was also incredibly wealthy. I don't think Juan Nepomuceno was incredibly wealthy. I think he's a successful businessman, but on a different scale, you know? And they begin to sell the merope. And at first, they sail several times back and forth between Lima and the Gulf of California to Asia, bringing silver because the Manila galleon isn't working. And then in 1825, they go to Mazatlan and they get off the ship. And the ship sails back with 500,000 pesos of silver. A peso is the same as $1 at that time, so you could say $500,000 of silver. But the men stay in the Gulf of California. And the reason is because the Civil War in Mexico had caused chaos. And so there was no means of financing silver production. Silver miners have to buy mercury before they can harvest silver, before they can refine silver. And so you needed people who had the capital to lend to miners to restart the production process. And these men came with a lot of money. So that's one of the things that comes out, that the capitalists of Asia did have money, the Hispanic capitalists. Okay, so this is basically the trade. The top trade is what you see with Britain. Britain is producing, the British in India are producing silver, they're producing opium, sorry, which they sell to the Spanish. So which is Spanish-Portuguese alliance here, right? And the silver, the British show up in Macao and Canton with silver, where they buy tea and take it to London. The Spanish and the Portuguese, the Spaniards of Manila and the Portuguese of Macao, take the opium to Macao or also to Xiamen in Fujian, and they get it somehow into Asia in return for textiles, which they take to Latin America, and they purchase with the textiles in Mazatlan silver. So in the early days, maybe this was done in Acapulco with the Manila galleon, but afterwards it becomes Mazatlan and also San Blas. But for my characters, it's really Mazatlan. So I've come to see Mazatlan from 1825 as really a port of the former officials of the Royal Philippine Company. And it's a port designed to trade with China. Now, I already said this. I already said that. Okay, so we're going to move right along here. And I think I said this too. I said that too. So we get to the Bank of England crisis in 1825. So the Basques, when Spain starts to fall apart, the Basques in Calcutta and the Portuguese, through the de Souza family, had seen the British as a stable system they could rely on. So you get these Anglo-Portuguese alliances, which is what Juan Nepomuceno Machado de Souza represents. However, in 1825, the Bank of England collapsed, in part because they had lent too much money to independent Mexico. and independent Bolivia and independent Peru. And these countries could not pay it back. So it was a huge crisis around the world. I mean, you see FX Irizarry in Calcutta died of a heart attack. There's another fellow I know in Santa Barbara who wound up robbing his father-in-law because he was about to go under. There's a man, John Begg, in Lima, Peru, who starts to fail. It's a global crisis for anybody who had thought the British were stable. And somehow when Irizarry dies, James Matheson, the Scot, who had been employed by Irizarry, winds up with his assets. He tells the family that there are no assets, and he takes the money. And he also takes the connections to the Portuguese traders and the Spaniards of Manila. And so there's suddenly Jardine Matheson is the major force. Now, this is Mazatlan. Let's see, they invest, so the Scots, including a family called the Mackintosh family in Calcutta, and Matheson, along with the Spaniards of Manila, along with the Portuguese of Macao, and Spaniards of Canton, like the Calvos, they all invest $500,000 in this ship called the Merope, and it's very much like the Manila Galleon, which had a cargo of $500,000 at the time. And they send this ship to Mazatlan to get silver. Now, some interesting things happen, and nobody's ever investigated this, but the following year, a firm called Guadalupe y Calvo emerges in southern Chihuahua, right behind Mazatlan, and from that on, they produce like some millions of pesos in the next 15 years worth of silver. And I think, well, I don't know. I'm guessing there's a connection since the Manning and Mackintosh is the family that's running that mine, and Calvo is a name connected to the governor of Chihuahua, but also to the factor of the Royal Philippine Company in Canton. And meanwhile, Juan Nepomuceno Machado de Souza and Francisco Javier Espeleta remain in Mexico. This is the office that Juan Nepomuceno Machado had. It's here. Is a little plaque talking about him. And I don't know if any of you have been to Mazatlan, but the center of town is the Plaza Machado, or it's called Plazuela Machado. And he built it in 1837 with his money to make the place attractive. People think of Mazatlan as a colonial city. It wasn't founded until it didn't really grow until 1837. So it's fake colonial, and it's something that Juan Nepomuceno Machado de Souza created to attract traders. He marries Dorotea Andrade y Otero. She's only 7 years old when they are betrothed. So it's obvious that he's trying to get in with her family. Her mother's side included Andrade y Hijos and Guaymas. Guaymas only exports one thing, which is silver. And Mazatlan does too. And I wonder then if there is a long-standing Portuguese network in the silver ports of West Mexico. I'm pretty sure there was, but I don't know anything about it. It's like little hints. And her father, Joaquin Otero, becomes a partner of his. And I know this because he writes letters to, I've gone to the Jardine Matheson Archive in England, and through the Santa Barbara Mission Archive Library also has letters. And he says Santa Barbara is his first landfall for the ships coming back. I took a journey to Sinaloa, and we went inland 79 kilometers to Pánuco, which is a mine that Juan Nepomuceno Machado de Souza purchased. I believe it was 1837. And this is just a picture they have in the town. It's their own representation of the silver mining in Pánuco, and it still is a silver mining town now. The Canadians get the silver out. And Antonio Lerma Garay was the Mazatlan historian who made that possible for me. This is Pánuco. You see, it's kind of an alpine feeling up there because you're so high. Now, the fun little aspects of Juan Nepomuceno Machado's correspondence. He sends his mother, Sabina de Souza, in Manila, 600 pesos every year, $600. In 1837, he sends her $3,000 for a house. And James Matheson's nephew, Alexander Matheson, goes to Manila and actually, selects the house and tells Juan Nepomuceno, forget it, 3,000 is not enough, you have to spend 4,000, which is a theme with my fellow, that he's a bit frugal. He also sends 300 per year to Mary Lumsden in Calcutta, which makes me think that perhaps he had a British wife and child in Calcutta, because that's usually why a man sends money. He buys his sister Dominga in Manila pearl earrings and cashmere shawls. He asks for 2 very fine California otter skins for a woman whom he does not name. He has 4 children with Dorotea, and the firstborn was 1834. She was 16 by then. So it seems that their marriage really started around 1833. And they remained married for many years. So his brother, I think one of the more interesting stories is how Benito Isaac Machado de Souza arrives in Mazatlan in 1831. The Mazatlan historians have traced the family, and they believe that while Juan Nepomuceno was born in Manila, that Benito Machado de Souza was not, and he was probably born in Macao. He becomes captain of the Dorotea, and there is a pilot. Sometimes being captain doesn't mean you are the pilot, within the, yeah. So it could mean that he's in charge of the mercantile aspects of the voyage. The pilot is Victorino Legaspi. In 1833, he sails from Mazatlan to Macao with 31,168 in silver. Now, this is not a voyage on behalf of Jardine Matheson. This is a voyage on behalf of these 2 brothers. This is their own work, So I really would like to know what route he take. His brother gave him 3,000 in silver to get the ship repaired in Hawaii on the way. It needed to have new copper on the hull. And so they knew the ship wasn't in the greatest shape. Benito doesn't stop in Hawaii. Hawaii is an American outpost. And this, I think, is a symbol that Benito is more a man of Macao and not a mayor of the Anglosphere. So when he does arrive in Macao, the ship is in terrible shape. Anyway, I have never seen an image of a route taken by a Portuguese or Spanish actor in the 1830s. So if we could see one, I would like to. Okay, when he gets to Macao, poor Benito Machado de Souza, he has 3,000 from his brother. His brother has ties to Jardine Matheson, which is a British company. Jardine Matheson is in Canton, so the letters start flying back and forth because, he hires a British carpenter to fix the ship. And a running theme with Benito is that these British, they're just trouble. So he says, the carpenter does a terrible job. That's the end of the 3,000 he doesn't have anymore. He has to feed the crew. The cargo hasn't arrived. Why not? Because Jardine Matheson was supposed to bring the cargo from his mother, Sabina de Souza, in Manila to Macao, and it's not there. They arrive May 15th, and they need to leave by July 15th, or the monsoon will go against them. So as they get closer and closer to July 15th, Benito gets sicker and sicker. And it comes August 15th, comes September 15th. By this time, he's sick with worry, and he's run out of funds. He's asking Jardine Matheson to give him more money on Juan Nepomuceno's account. Jardine Matheson says, your brother never authorized us to give you funds. And what can he do? He can't get out without repairing the ship. The longer he stays, the more dangerous it is. He cannot leave without getting the money to repair the ship. Every day they stay, it costs extra funds. Finally, Jardine Matheson puts him in charge with Bartolomeu Barreto. And Bartolomeu Barreto, Paolo Afonso helped me find out more about him, which is really interesting. It really looks like Barretos in the letters, but so Bartolomé Barreto had represented Jardine Matheson in Macao for many years. And this is a very large-scale trading network family also. He was born in Bombay, but he dies in Macao. And many times he gets opium from Calcutta to Canton. But for Benito, Mr. Barreto was a great relief. And this is his Portuguese letter. Recebi aviso de casa consignatoria encantado, diciendo que a pesar de echarme ser enorme, a soma de despesas justas como obrigue desde a su arribada, contudo, como fin únicamente de verem a desgraciada Doroteo fora de aquí, en seguimiento de seu destino de una partida de $914. So I think it's very interesting that he goes to Portuguese in his most desperate moment. And this is written after he has actually tried to leave Macao. So they already spent $7,000 and they're leaving Macao, and they leave in November. Well, you can't leave in November because the monsoon pushes you backwards. And that's exactly what happened. They get to the island of Taipa right outside Macao. The monsoon pushes them backwards and their sail is a wreck. So then this is the 914, is to put things back together and get out. And they finally must leave around February because his brother thinks he's dead, but he arrives in Santa Barbara in May of 1834. So, you know, Jardine Matheson disparages him so many times, but actually Bartolomé Barreto thought his books were in order. He knew when to sail, and he knew it was dangerous not to sail on time, and he does make it across the Pacific at the wrong time of year. And as far as I can tell, the voyage was very successful because they sold everything and were able to pay back their 20% interest that Jardine Matheson charged on this $8,000 loans on a $6,000 ship. This is a picture, thanks to Paulo Afonso. It is Bartolomeo Barreto. Now this is the father. There's actually a son, Bartolomeo Antonio Barreto. They are a family that is both Portuguese and of descent of people of India. And they had and I thought this was rather interesting. Whoops. See, I'm supposed to finish. Can I go backwards? We don't seem to want to do that. But anyway, the family had a bank together with the Macintosh in Calcutta in 1819. So this kind of brings us full circle because Bartolomeo Barreto had in his heritage the de Souza name. So perhaps he was distant kin to Benito Isaac Machado de Souza. And then in addition, it just ties it, you see this connection to Macintosh again, which I'd like to pursue. In the end of the day, this is kind of how I'd like to leave it for the Americans, you know, that by the early 1850s, Benito lives in Sacramento, which is the closest a sailor could get to the gold rush. And he probably was doing what his brother Juan Nepomuceno had done in Mazatlan, which is to extend money and supplies to miners before they get their ore. And he must have done well for himself, because then he takes his children and visits his mother, Sabina de Souza, in Manila in the 1850s, which is also kind of touching. That is Sacramento, about that time. Well, there was a really strong tie between Mazatlan and San Francisco at this time. I believe there was a steamship, and people were coming they were coming Panama to Mazatlan to San Francisco. So there was a heavy connection there. Now, like I said, all I'd ever heard about was contraband trade in the Pacific, with the idea that New England ship captains were the actors, because Richard Henry Dana wrote such a compelling book in 1836, about a voyage in 1836. He wrote a great book. I love his book. But that was just 1836 new actors coming from New England in a way. And the old story, the Machado de Souza story, illustrates that Portuguese knew how to raise money on both sides of the Pacific. They knew they had allies in multiple ports. And they were kind of bicultural people. You know, the way that Juan Nepomuceno can speak Spanish or Portuguese or English, and the way that Bartolomeo Barreto is both a descendant of the people of India and also of the Portuguese community. This really helps them get things done. And I think there was some of that in all the other parts of these stories too, that I had seen references to the Portuguese. And I also do think that the Portuguese are some of the finest sailors in the world, you know.
Discussion about that.
And I would also like to say that for the 1830s, the Jardine Matheson Archive in Cambridge, UK is a remarkable place to find details about the Manila Macao actors and their influence on California, and also to find out about Mazatlan's influence on California. And this is a totally new archive for the history of California that we never thought of using. There's quite a bit in there. And I myself, I don't like working all by myself, though I usually do, so in some way I must like that. But I was hoping maybe out of this conference that I might meet some Portuguese person that might be interested in pulling on some of these stories with me. So thank you.
Right, we have a great presentation, maybe the tip of an iceberg, lots of things to find, to discover. Any questions? We have a couple minutes for some questions if you may be interested. And then our last half an hour, we are over the 1 o'clock initial program, but that's okay, we still have time. The lunch bags are coming in a moment, and we should be able to make it to the Maritime Museum. So the next presentation will be a recorded one, because unfortunately Professor Graça Ventura, for health reasons, she couldn't come here and be here in presence. But we have the husband and the son representing her, so thank you very much for being here. But so again, we have a couple minutes for questions, so if anyone wants to ask anything about this Macao, Philippines, Calcutta, opium, silk, please feel free to...
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's really interesting, I think, because it seems to me that it's like showing how the commerce became once the independence of New Spain started. I once listened to a professor saying that when Buenos Aires was shut for the commerce with Spain, with the direct commerce with Seville, Uruguay's, the port of Porto in Uruguay started working because Spanish needed chocolate. But I think that for the Pacific, this kind of study is very interesting and important, because when we see the Manila galleon system, you wonder what happened afterwards, how the system became so different. But this is a kind of light to see how commerce that before the independence already were taking, it was working like that. Like, for instance, I think opium maybe was being sold, I don't know if by the galleon, perhaps, or perhaps not, I don't know. It's something that you can look for. I was going to recommend maybe the books of Carmen Yuste. I don't know if you know her. Yeah, but she works the 18th century. But I think that you're going to like, it's like a link between the colonial trade and the maps afterwards, all the maps that we know of the main ports in the continent after the 19th century. Sorry, it's just a comment, and thank you very much. It's very interesting. And maybe you may like to perhaps to see the books of Mai Lockburn from Royal Holloway in England, in London. He's working the commerce between India, I think Calicut, and London in that period. Thank you.
Professor Andres, you want to?
Well, also in the same vein, I mean, I don't have such an eloquent and long comment, but I just had a question. So I'm curious about your overall view of this transition from the galleon is folding. It's already by the 1780s is a shell of its former self, 1790s. So how would you, like in a nutshell, would you characterize this transition? Is it just that the Philippines commerce sort of took over? Is that sort of the from the galleon, or how would you characterize this transition to this incredible glimpse that you gave us already by the 1820s and 1830s?
The Royal Philippine Company took over the Manila Galleon by the end, and I don't know whether that happened, in 1790 or in 1805, I don't know. But it's clear by 1813 that almost all the cargo in the Manila Galleon is going to Francisco Iraeta, who's the representative of the Royal Philippine Company in Mexico City. But it's not landing in Acapulco, it's landing in San Blas. So everything is moving up towards the Gulf of California, which I think of as one big region. From Sinaloa to San Francisco is really one region, and at the time, Guadalajara was its commercial capital. And what's interesting is the Spanish state tried to kind of reduce the power of Mexico City and the galleon in 1768 and they didn't seem to. Like Carmen Eustace says, oh, the Manila galleon traders refused to collaborate with the Royal Philippine Company, and so they couldn't take over the galleon. But that was in 1785, and it's clear that by 1813, that's no longer true. And the old galleon traders in Manila are all working through the Royal Philippine Company, and you see that with the Merope's voyage, that it's the entire capitalist class of Manila and the entire capitalist class connected in Canton and Calcutta to the Royal Philippine Company, plus the Scots. They're all going to collaborate in sending the ship to get the silver. So by that time, the Basques, really a Basque faction of the Hispanic world, has taken the lead in running Pacific Rim trade. But the Basque traders do not have the ancient ties in Asia that the Portuguese do. And that's why an alliance with the Portuguese are the people on the ground. They have this deep-seated connection to Asia, and they can bring things together. It's actually people of India who produce opium. It's not the British. It's the British's relationship. So a family like the Barretos that has ties to India and also ties to Macao becomes a really important ally of Jardine Matheson. So when you see Jardine Matheson on the rise, that's just because people have written books about them. We need books written about the Portuguese actors for us to understand how important they were. Now, of course, the opium trade is not a nice trade. And I think of that also, like the original sin of the Pacific is the opium trade. The way that in the Atlantic you talk about slavery, I think for the Pacific we have to always talk about the opium trade, because it is a way to make, you can sell unlimited amounts of opium to China because the people are getting addicted. And really it's a mirror image of what you see today in the United States, where China is sending precursors for opium through Mazatlan up into the United States, and it's an unlimited market because people get addicted. And it's very difficult for a government to stamp out the trade because so many people along the way are corrupt. But it's fascinating, and it's fascinating. At the time, people did not consider opium to be the danger that we consider it today. At that time, people considered it as on a par with perhaps weed or heavy whiskey. And it just became almost like the silver. When silver, eventually what happens is Jardine Matheson stops trying to get silver from Mazatlan, and they just openly bring opium into Canton, and that does lead to war with China. And in 1839, Juan Nepomuceno Machado de Souza actually sends his ship, it's actually 1842, he sends his ship to assist the British in putting down revolt in China. So at that time, what's really interesting to me about that is how much the business elites of West Mexico, including California, really thought that the English were going to be taking over where the Spanish government had been before. So I had never really thought of that as an issue, and that's, I think, why we never looked in British archives for any information about California. You don't realize there was this moment where it seemed as if the British were going to replace the Spanish as the dominant empire, which they did in many parts of the world, but not in California and West Mexico. I can see that we need to stop. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we have the last presentation of our conference today. Unfortunately, for health reasons, Professor Maria de Graça Ventura couldn't be here. So we have recorded a video for her presentation, not in real time. So she was kind enough to record the video. It's about half an hour long, but at least we have the husband and the son representing her here, so appreciate your kindness. And so once this video plays, then the lunch boxes should arrive. We can walk outside, eat lunch, and then head for the Maritime Museum, okay? So about half an hour, and again, this is not real-time intervention, so it's just a recorded video. So the title of the presentation is Portuguese Navigators in the Pacific under the Spanish flag, specifically Isabel, Barreto, and Pedro Fernandes de Queirós. Professor Maria de Graça Ventura, she has a PhD in Arts and Humanities. From the topic was the history of the Portuguese expansion from the University of Lisbon. She has a master as well in history of the Portuguese discoveries and expansion from 1997, also in the Faculty of Arts and Humanities in Lisbon. And their bachelor's is also in history in the same area, in the same university. Her affiliations go with a Center for History of Research in the University of Lisbon, and she's also the president of the board of the Ibero-Atlantic Culture Institute, other than being a member of the Portuguese Academy of History, a member of the Association for Spanish and Portuguese Historical Studies. So thank you very much, Professor Graça Ventura, in the name of the father, the husband, and the son are here. Okay, so we can play the video whenever up there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm telling you just as it is. You know, they said, okay, we're counting on you. What time? Like probably at 3, and we anticipate about 30 people to go, and that's it. Okay.
About 20 minutes driving from here.
Yes, it's about 20 minutes. I'm not 100% sure of the parking spaces around the area. I have to find them out myself. I mean, I've been there a number of times, but there are a number of parking lots close by.
It's 30 minutes to have lunch.
Yes, so we have a little bit of time. Enjoy a bit of the sun here in the Balboa if you want. We can go to the fountain, just sit there a little bit, catch some sun, eat our brown bag lunch, and go from there. Okay? Thank you so much. And thank you again to the Historical Center. Thank you.
We're thinking the same. There are more lunches here than there are people, so everybody.